Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part two. You probably just watched part one if you're watching this. If you haven't yet, I would really encourage you to go back and watch part one that I just released on my channel. It does start out with the history of Gallipoli, and I learned a lot of new things in it that I didn't know about before. But I'm looking forward to part two here and kind of seeing what new info I'm going to learn about in this part of the video. I'm assuming they're going to go into more of like what, the 8 months was like while the British and the Australian and the French troops were all stuck on these beaches for so long. Now, for my previous documentary, I do know like how horrific it was. It'll be interesting to see if there are any new gleams of information, any new angles here that they teach. Also enjoyed listening to Joaquim talk about the songwriting process in the previous video. It looks like we have Har here for this one. I know I'm ready. Roger's got his combat helmet on, so he is ready to go. Let's jump into part two.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Per from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
This is part two of Cliffs of Gallipoli. Now, we covered this song in 2 episodes, so I could cover 2 aspects of the topic.
And the song took us all the way from Sweden to Turkey.
The initial Gallipoli landings, which we covered in part 1, had been both a tactical and strategic failure. The Allied troops held onto their beachheads and had managed to conquer a few ridges and hills around the landing sites, but that was nothing compared to the objectives set for them. The invasion plans were far too ambitious and were based on the belief that the Ottomans would be easy enemies to defeat. By May, the Allies should have cleared the whole peninsula. Instead, the Ottomans had the advantage, and they brought in reinforcements, machine guns and howitzers, while fortifying the higher ground. German General Lehmann von Sanders had time to read the reports of his Turkish officers and commit his reserves. And although their localized counterattacks were stopped by the invaders, it was clear that they would not just sit and remain passive forever. On the night of May 19th, the Ottomans gathered a large force of fresh reinforcements from Constantinople and Smyrna under Esad Pasha. Thousands of cheerful young men, praying for God's help, went over the top towards the enemy. But the Anzacs facing them had been well aware of the build-up to the attack. As daylight broke, 10,000 casualties littered the narrow fields of no man's land, piled on top of one another. Like everywhere in this war, the firepower of entrenched machine guns and determined riflemen had created an impassable wall. And the Ottomans learned a lesson by blood. Never again here would they try to attack on such a large scale, and instead would focus on smaller skirmishes, raids, and their relentless snipers. Soon, the stench of rotting flesh in the summer's heat was too much to bear. A short armistice was arranged, and men from both sides went onto the battlefield to bury the dead. It was the first time here that the men came to know each other without violence. Curious looks and even small gifts were exchanged.
Whoa, really? Huh. I didn't know about any of this. It's really interesting to hear all of this new information. Man, what a thing that must have been to like be out there with your enemy, I guess, and burying your dead. So bizarre to think about that, actually. Here you are trying to kill each other, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, we're gonna stop so that we can bury dead, and then we'll go back to it again. It's just crazy.
Trench warfare set in on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and soldiers on both sides realized they were going to be there for a while. To escape the constant threat of shells and sniper fire, men began to disappear under the earth, into trenches and dugouts. The peninsula was soon transformed into a maze of trenches, saps, and strong points, zigzagging through the rough countryside. Both sides mined and countermined each other, while on the surface, skirmishes were fought all the time over the narrow plateaus, steep ridges, and hilltops. Places like Dead Man's Ridge, Battleship Hill, or Lone Pine were constantly contested, and yet, at Anzac Cove, the men found ways to communicate with the enemy. No one wanted to die needlessly, so found ways.
Wow, so I'm assuming that's an Anzac troop giving a Turkish troop water. Huh. So bizarre. Like, so much I don't know how to put it into words. Just so many little things that happened here, little moments like this during war that you don't ever hear about. You know, this is a really nice picture. Whoever snapped this picture, man, they really caught a really cool moment. You know, it's one thing to hear like the general overview about like how horrible Gallipoli went for the Allies, and you know, how it was kind of a victory for the Ottomans, I guess. It's another thing to like really dig in and hear all of these details like this. It just gives it so much more character. This is what makes history really interesting to me, is not just learning the big overview of things, but learning little nuggets of stories, you know, kind of like hidden in all of it. This picture is also just a testament to, like, you know, at the end of the day, we're all humans, and it doesn't matter like where we're from or what the color of our skin is or what our nationality is. You know, we're all the same in a lot of ways. It's a shame that we have so many divisions, I guess. You know, like nationality and you know, countries are needed to a certain extent because human beings do need a sense of belonging somewhere, and I think a sense of community. So it has its place, but at the same time, you know, you tend to kind of like forget sometimes that people from other parts of the world are just the same as you, and they have the same needs and wants usually. They're just kind of born under different circumstances, you know? I know that's going way off topic here, but that's what this picture is kind of making me think about.
Ways to communicate with the enemy. No one wanted to die needlessly, so sometimes instead of bombs, they might throw a pack of cigarettes over the parapets or toss across a can of bully beef. The French on the far right at Helles had similar live and let live arrangements with their enemies. Like if both sides had to cross a certain gully to bring in fresh water, they would plant little flags or signposts, and as long as no one ventured further than that, they would not be shot at. In the British sector of Helles, though, there was no such fraternization. Ottoman High Command loathed the British imperialists and thought them to be the major aggressor in this war. Both sides fired at the slightest sign of movement, harassed each other day and night with artillery, and gave no quarter during advances.
Okay, so that's really interesting too, that the French and the Australians and New Zealanders had kind of this camaraderie almost in a way with the enemy, but with the British, you know, that just wasn't happening. I understand what he's saying though and why that probably was, but yeah, that's just interesting to me that in this case the nationality made a difference.
The overall situation at Gallipoli changed little over the summer. The Allies needed more men and artillery to achieve anything bigger than taking the next ridge before them, and the Ottomans had all the time in the world to strengthen their defenses. Here and there, brave attacks and successful bluffs continued to improve the Allied positions. They did not change the overall stalemate, and larger assaults led to massacres and huge casualties for both sides. While the Ottomans were defending their homeland against foreign invaders, the sense of the whole point of the campaign began to be lost among the Allies. Clearly, they were not winning this battle, and clearly they were not advancing towards Constantinople. They could not even advance towards the next ridge without losing friends and comrades. The dehydration due to the constant lack of water, which they had to import from across the sea, the ever-present sniper fire, the flies, fever, lice, dysentery, morale plummeted, as did the health of the soldiers. Because life at Gallipoli was never safe. You could dodge bullets, you could dodge shells, but it was harder to dodge illness or dodge exhaustion. High Command was aware of the lack of progress, but what to do? Send in more men in the hope of achieving something? Was victory even still possible? And if not, how to end this? British Secretary of State for War Lord Kitchener feared the loss of British prestige in the Islamic world if they retreated. Such a retreat might also encourage other nations to join the Central Powers. But you know, the common soldiers cared little for such concerns.
Yeah.
They will never leave our hearts or fade away, live forever. They were far too young to die, such a way.
August was supposed to change things. A new landing at Suvla Bay that would open the possibility of a left hook, and in concert, with a breakout attempt at Anzac Cove, would disrupt the Ottoman hold over the peninsula and finally open up a way to the Sarıyer Ridge. Diversions for the landing at Suvla took place all over the peninsula. But though there was still a lot of fight left in the exhausted Anzac troops, the plans of High Command were simply out of range of what was physically possible. And the landings at Suvla Bay faced the same problems as the landings before that we saw in Part 1. Under fire and in unmapped territory, the men quickly lost track of time and space. And although they advanced quite a bit inland, they were soon checked by determined Ottoman reserves and had to dig in. They did not meet any of their objectives. The August battles brought no major changes to the overall situation. A fatalistic mood set in over the Allied forces. In September and October, men and guns were further worn out, and the weather began to turn. The heat and the flies vanished, sure, but the approaching winter was even more threatening. The thought of evacuation began making the rounds. By October 14th, General Sir Ian Hamilton, in charge since the beginning, was dismissed, and General Sir Charles Munro took his place. Munro had a more realistic approach than Hamilton. By the end of October, he had visited all 3 landing sites and came to the conclusion that the whole campaign was nothing short of total disaster. The Ottomans still occupied the dominating heights, and the overall lack of sufficient artillery and supplies would not challenge that. He telegraphed his opinions back to Kitchener, but Kitchener didn't believe him and went to see for himself. And yeah, Kitchener could barely hide his shock over the whole situation either. By the end of November, the War Committee had approved the evacuation. Problem was that this is easier said than done. Immediate evacuation would result in a massacre if the Ottomans caught them halfway through, but with winter approaching, they could not wait for long. The temperatures dropped significantly. Heavy rain poured in from the heights down into the trenches. Cold winds from the sea hit the exposed troops. Frostbite grew rampant. Although the Ottoman soldiers were in the same boat, they at least had a short supply chain, bolstered by gifts of things like winter clothing from the people of Constantinople. The only real option for the Allies was to evacuate without the Ottomans realizing it. The plan was that they would lull the Ottomans by reducing activities to a minimum. The Anzacs and the 80,000 men at Suvla Bay were first. As they stopped responding to the enemy's shelling, the Ottomans came forward, but were met with rifle fire. As this was repeated, the Ottomans got used to the silence. Over weeks, the Allied lines were gradually thinned out until only a screening force remained. Sappers began booby-trapping the trenches, supply stores, and dugouts with tripwire explosives. On the night of December 18th, the final evacuation began. The Ottomans suspected nothing and, in fact, were only alerted by the fire and explosions as the last men set the fuses. The evacuation was a masterpiece in planning and execution. But what about Hellas? Now that the Ottomans knew what was up, could they be fooled again? By diverse patterns of counterfire, periods of silence, they gave the Ottomans a false sense of activity until January 8th, when the evacuation of Hellas finally began. The last men in the trenches were almost crazy with nerves, because if the Ottomans had sniffed out their little trick, they could easily overrun the beaches. But the night remained silent. Everything that could not be brought away was booby-trapped or destroyed. It was not until the last British soldiers had left the beaches that the first Ottoman patrols caught wind of the evacuation. The evacuations were complete successes.
At the shoreline.
Too bad the invasions weren't as successful. They were really good at planning evacuations, apparently, though. Yeah, I didn't really think about, like, evacuations and retreats really until the Napoleonic War videos that I did, and we talked about, or they talked about how a lot of the armies would, the losing side would try to retreat or whatever, and they would have rear guards to kind of help fight off the enemy to keep them from being captured as they retreated. And it wasn't until I learned about that I really thought about, you know, if you are retreating, yeah, the enemy could come and very easily try to, like, overrun you and take you. And so having those troops kind of hanging back to fight them off, you know, I guess they weren't quite doing the same thing here. I mean, they were evacuating and just kind of trying to fool the Ottomans into it, but as, like, an overall military strategy, you have to think about that, I guess, and that's just not something I was aware of until I started watching Napoleon. And so we see kind of like the same thing here, slightly different circumstances.
The evacuations were complete successes.
At the shoreline, blood of heroes stains the land. Light a candle, one for each of them who fought and died in vain.
The full story of this battle, the Dardanelles, is clad in many tales and legends, which I encourage you to look up for yourself. But it had some lasting effects, even long beyond the war. For the Australians and New Zealanders, the Anzacs, the fight for Gallipoli grew into a part of their national identity. It was their baptism in fire and the beginning of a unique legacy separate from Britain and the British Empire. And for the Turks, the battle actually served to form a bond of friendship between those former enemies. They shared the same feelings of pride and valor, sacrifice and loss. This is perhaps best expressed by the following words attributed to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us, where they lie side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are at peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well.
Wow. Interesting. So this must be why then, because I have a lot of Australians and New Zealanders tell me in the comments of my other videos that I think it was something like 10,000 of you still travel to Gallipoli every year to celebrate, or not celebrate, to remember these landings and Anzac Day. And you guys have like a ceremony there and everything. So that must be why this friendship he's talking about, the countries, Turkey and Australia and New Zealand, this friendship that you guys formed over time, that must be why they let you do that. Yeah, I had no idea. And I've also heard a lot of you guys tell me that this kind of started your national identity. I didn't really think about it, though, in terms of separation from Britain, however. That's something I have to unpack more because, like, I hear that being said, but I don't really fully grasp how or why. I guess I probably wouldn't as an American. I probably would have to live in Australia or be from there to really fully understand it. But that's really interesting how this played into giving you kind of your Australian, New Zealand identity separate from the Commonwealth and from Britain.
Mothers, wipe your tears, your sons will rest a million years. Found their peace at last, as both unto friend and forget. And they knew they would die.
Now, at the very beginning, you said this song took us from Sweden to Turkey. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, the whole idea, I mean, we get a lot of emails like, write a song about this, write a song about that. But when it actually came to Clips of Gallipoli, we were playing a show in Netherlands.
In the Netherlands?
Yes,
Okay.
and a guy came, he was a songwriter. A songwriter doing several big artists in Turkey.
Okay.
He explained that I have an idea how you can write a song about something that you probably never heard about. And it's about my home country, Turkey.
Okay.
And a battle that took place there. And it will fit totally to your music. This guy came prepared and he gave me this whole bunch of papers.
Yeah. But you knew the name Gallipoli before or no? Had you heard?
No, I mean, this is a song that has many.
Okay, so this partly answers my question about them being history buffs that I brought up in part 1, because I was wondering, how do they know so much about history to be able to write these songs about it? So it sounds like they also hadn't heard of Gallipoli, so good to know that I'm not alone in that. So that's really interesting. They had not heard about it, but this guy from Turkey gave them, I guess, a bit of history to look at, and, interesting.
Gallipoli before or no? Had you heard?
No, I mean, this is a song that has many years in the making.
Right.
It became like something for Turkish people. This was very important.
Yeah.
It is important for the Anzacs as well, for Australians and New Zealanders.
And forming that friendship between the enemies, between the Turks and the Anzacs.
That was one of the things that inspired us from the beginning, like the speech about the Turk or the memorial wall,
Right?
where it says that here no nationality needs to be mattered because here we are all brothers. This stone was very important in the inspiration for writing the song.
There is no enemy, there is no victory. Only boys who lost their lives in the sand.
After we released it, we were not sure like what is gonna happen now, but then we got the invitation because this guy, he had some contacts in Turkey, and he was like, guys, I think that you need to perform this song in Turkey.
That's cool.
And I was excited because we had never been there, so of course I'm always open to playing in new places.
Yeah, sure.
When we were sitting in the restaurant, all the TVs, we constantly saw advertisement for us.
Wow.
This was something we'd never seen before.
Yeah.
Today, we've
Yeah, but this was before you got that
yeah,
big.
yeah. This is more than 10 years ago. So this was the first time we actually saw like, wow, we're on TV.
Yeah.
We saw the interest for Sabaton once we landed there was ridiculously big. And what people would do when we just wanted to have an ice cream, you know, they would clear tables for us in a bar so that we can have an ice cream. The big event was, of course, Sabaton performing
Yeah.
in a TV.
Yeah.
And this was a quite big television channel and nothing that we have ever done before. But it was hilarious how it worked on set. Because in a big TV station, normally you have strict rules, what is happening. But in this case, I think that all of them were so excited about having us there
Yeah, that's really
that they
cool.
didn't care about rules.
That's awesome.
So we were allowed to do whatever we wanted in the studio and play as much as we wanted. So it ended up with us playing pretty much a set, like a gig.
On Turkish TV?
On Turkish TV. And there were people in the crowd and sitting there, and it was an absolutely amazing story. And I loved, that thing was what the Cliffs of Gallipoli led to.
I wonder if that is on YouTube anywhere or online anywhere, because that would be interesting to watch, actually, I think.
Well, thank you very much, Per. Okay, that's it for Cliffs of Gallipoli, and this was Sabaton History.
Okay, guys, so that's it for the history portion. We're going to jump in and watch this music video now. Of course, I've heard little snippets of the song throughout both of these parts, so looking forward to listening to the full song. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. Oh, wasn't expecting that. The beat. Very strong beat. Oh.
Hear them whisper, voices from the other side. Hear them calling, for with those no friends are resting side by side. They will never leave our hearts or fade away, live forever. They were far too young to die in such a way. How many wasted lives, how many dreams did fade away, broken promises they won't be coming home. Oh, mothers, wipe your tears, your sons will rest a million years. Found their peace at last, as both turned to friend and forget, and they knew they would die. Gallipoli left their letters in the sand. Such waste of life, Gallipoli. Dreams of freedom turned to dust. Hell is waiting where the ocean meets the sand, cliffs of burden, where the soldiers rushed into a certain death. At the shoreline, stains the land. Light a candle, one for each of them who fought and died in vain. There is no enemy, there is no victory. Only boys who lost their lives in the sand. Young men were sacrificed, their names are carved in stone and kept alive. And forever we will honor the memory of them. And they knew they would die. Gallipoli left their letters in the sand. Such waste of life, Gallipoli. Dreams of freedom turn to dust. How many wasted lives, how many dreams that fade away. Broken promises, they won't be coming home. Oh, mothers, wipe your tears, your sons will rest a million years. Found their peace at last, as hope turned to friend and forget. And they knew they would die. Gallipoli left their letters in the sand. Such waste of life, Gallipoli. Dreams of freedom turn to dust.
Very nice. I will say, I don't like that song overall better than, I think Primo Victoria for me is still kind of my favorite that I've heard of them so far. What I did like about this song though was that it incorporated the piano a lot. So there was quite some complicated bars that the piano played, especially during the bridge of this song. The drumming in it was way more noticeable as well. It had that really strong beat going through the whole thing. I really liked when the drum paired up with the guitar solo that Joaquin said he wrote, and it was one of the only ones that he wrote that actually made it into one of their songs. I really like the pairing between the drum and the guitar solo, and having those, like, I don't know if it's an offbeat, but it's just kind of like it's almost like a staggered beat as well, but it really catches your ear. I really like that. So the drumming mostly was like I said, way more noticeable to me. Since I played percussion, I tend to kind of like gravitate towards the drumming a little bit in a lot of this, and it just sounded like a really fun song to play. Out of all of the three that I've heard so far, I think this would be the most fun as a drummer to play on, and also maybe as a guitarist as well, because I really liked the guitar solo and the piano. Like I said, they did throw the piano in there along with those as well, so all three really complemented each other, especially during that bridge and towards the end end of the song when they were kind of doing the outro of it. I also heard those choral voices that they talked about. I know in the Primo Victoria song, Joaquin was talking about how that was kind of like the first song where they incorporated some choir type sounds. So it looks like they kind of took that and ran with it. I'm assuming this came out after Primo Victoria. So I definitely heard the choir. It was way more prominent in this than it was in Primo Victoria. So anyway, I really enjoyed this two-parter of Gallipoli and Sabaton's song. It's also really interesting just kind of hearing the songwriting process and how it came about with that Turkish songwriter approaching them. And it's really cool that they got to go to Turkey and see the shores of Gallipoli and just how beautiful they are now. I feel like that's kind of the way it is a lot with war, is that the countryside you fight in usually is very scenic and stuff, and you go there now and there's like no traces of, you know, such bloody battles happening, but you can still see like little remnants. Like he said, he would trip over a trench or something like that. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you watched part 1. If you haven't done that yet, go back and do that. Also, if you haven't yet, make sure that you like and subscribe. I would definitely appreciate it. I've also got the links to my social media and Discord down in the description below, and I have started a Patreon, which I have not officially announced yet on this channel, but I'm just starting to get stuff up on it now, so there's a lot more to come. But if you're interested in checking out the Patreon, I have that link as well for you guys, so make sure you check all of that stuff out. Roger here, and I thank you guys for watching as always, and we will see you next time.